The flashing red and blue light sliced through the rainy night, illuminating the droplets on the windshield like a million tiny captured stars. Inside the simple sedan, a man sat with his hands calmly on the wheel, his breathing steady, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror. He was a man accustomed to conflict, a man who had stared down threats far greater than two small-town cops on a power trip. But in their eyes, he was not a hero, he was a target. They would drag him, taunt him, and slam him against his own car, never knowing the storm they were about to unleash upon themselves. They were about to assault a ghost, a legend, and the 4 stars on his uniform would soon burn brighter than any sun they had ever seen. The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming a somber rhythm on the roof of the rented sedan. General Marcus Kane kept his eyes on the slick black ribbon of asphalt unwinding before him. The hypnotic sweep of the windshield wipers a poor substitute for the steady, reassuring hum of a military transport. He preferred the air, the vast, open sky where lines were clear and targets were defined. Down here on the ground, the lines blurred. He was close to the quiet town of Mill Creek, a place that held the 2 most important things in his life: the memories of his childhood and his older sister, Elena. Her last call had been frail, her voice a ready whisper that clung to him across the miles and the briefings. The doctors had used words like palliative and comfort, polite terms for a surrender he was not ready to accept. So he had cleared his schedule, trading the Pentagon's hallowed halls for the anonymity of a cross-country flight and this unremarkable rental car. He wore simple civilian clothes, a pair of dark jeans, a comfortable sweater, and a worn leather jacket. He was not General Kane, commander of United States Strategic Command tonight. He was just Marcus, Elena's little brother, coming home. The town of Mill Creek was nestled in a valley, a place that time seemed to have largely forgotten. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's business, where old grudges simmered for generations beneath a placid surface. For a stranger, especially a black man driving alone in the rain, that could be a dangerous thing. Marcus knew this not from intelligence reports, but from the bone-deep memory of his youth, of the warnings his father had given him about which roads to avoid after dark. It was on one of those very roads, a long, dark stretch, flanked by dense woods, that the world behind him suddenly erupted in a strobing kaleidoscope of red and blue. Marcus's eyes flickered to the rear-view mirror. A local police cruiser was tailgating him aggressively. He had not been speeding. He had checked his taillights before leaving the rental agency. He ran through a mental checklist the same way he would before a mission. All systems nominal. This was not a legitimate stop. His training, honed over decades of service in the most dangerous places on Earth, took over. He remained calm. He signaled, slowed the vehicle, and pulled over onto the wet gravel shoulder, the tires crunching softly. He turned on the interior light, rolled down his window just enough to speak through, and placed his hands in plain sight on the steering wheel, palms up. He knew the procedure. He had taught it to his own son. It was a drill for survival in a different kind of war zone. 2 officers emerged from the cruiser, their silhouettes distorted by the rain and the flashing lights. One was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a swagger that spoke of unchallenged authority. The other was younger, leaner, a step behind his partner. The taller officer, whose name tag would later read Caldwell, rapped his knuckles hard on the roof of the car before leaning down, his face unpleasantly close. License and registration. His voice was a low growl, devoid of any professional courtesy. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said, his own voice steady and calm. He slowly reached for his wallet and the glove compartment. "Is there a problem?" "You tell me," Caldwell grunted, his eyes scanning the car's interior with theatrical suspicion. "You were weaving back there, and one of your taillights is out." Marcus knew for a fact the taillight was fine. The weaving was a fabrication. "I see," he said, handing over his driver's license and the rental agreement. "I apologize if I was unsteady. The rain is quite heavy." Caldwell snatched the documents. He shone his flashlight directly into Marcus's eyes, a deliberate act of intimidation. Marcus did not flinch, his gaze unwavering. This calm defiance seemed to irritate the officer even more. "Marcus Kane," Caldwell read off the license, mispronouncing the last name with a sneer. "What's your business in Mill Creek tonight?" "I'm visiting family, officer," Marcus replied. "Family?" Caldwell scoffed, sharing a look with his partner Hale, who offered a weak, uncertain smile in return. Who might that be? Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second. He wanted to keep Elena out of this. "My sister," he said simply. Caldwell's flashlight beam dropped from Marcus's face and panned slowly across his body, lingering on his worn leather jacket and the simple sweater beneath. The officer's mind was clearly made up. He saw not a man visiting his sick sister, but a narrative he had already written. "Step out of the car, sir," Caldwell commanded, his voice losing any pretense of procedure. It was an order meant to provoke, to escalate. Marcus's training screamed at him. This was a critical juncture. He could assert his rights, refuse the unlawful order, and inflame the situation, or he could comply, de-escalate, and end this encounter as quickly as possible so he could get to Elena. His sister was his priority. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus said, his tone still perfectly even. "I'd prefer to remain in my vehicle." Caldwell's face darkened. He reached for the door handle. "I said get out of the car now." The click of the door latch echoed in the small cabin, a sound as final and ominous as a rifle bolt sliding home. The quiet drive was over. The battle had begun. The cold, rain-soaked air hit Marcus the moment the door was pulled open. Officer Caldwell's grip was like a vice on his upper arm, his knuckles digging into Marcus's bicep with punishing force. There was nothing professional about it. It was an act of raw aggression. "Easy, officer," Marcus said, his voice a low warning. He did not resist. Instead, using his body's momentum to step out of the car smoothly, preventing the officer from being able to claim he was being pulled or resisting. It was a subtle move, a demonstration of control that was utterly lost on Caldwell. "Don't you tell me how to do my job," Caldwell snarled, shoving him toward the rear of the sedan. "Hands on the trunk, spread them." Marcus complied, placing his palms flat on the wet metal. The rainwater was cold against his skin. He could see his own reflection, distorted in the glossy paint, the flashing police lights, painting his face in alternating shades of demonic red and sterile blue. Beside him, the younger officer, Hale, stood awkwardly, his hand hovering near his sidearm, his eyes darting nervously between his partner and the man they were detaining. He looked like a rookie, caught in a storm, far beyond his experience. "What is the reason for this, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice still betraying no anger, only a steely resolve. He kept his focus, analyzing their movements, their tones, their intent. Caldwell was the primary threat, emotionally unstable and looking for a fight. Hale was the variable, the weak link. "The reason is you're acting suspicious," Caldwell shot back, his hands beginning a rough, invasive pat-down. He slapped Marcus's pockets, ran his hands aggressively up his legs. "Driving a clunker like this late at night in a town you ain't from. We've had reports of break-ins." It was a lie, and they all knew it. The car was a standard rental, and Mill Creek had not seen a serious break-in in years. It was a flimsy pretext, a script written for men who looked like Marcus driving through towns that looked like Mill Creek. "You find anything, Travis?" Hale asked, his voice a little too high-pitched. "Just a wallet," Caldwell grumbled, pulling it from Marcus's back pocket. He flipped it open, his thumb smudging the plastic over Marcus's driver's license. "Marcus Kane, address Virginia." "Long way from home, aren't you?" "As I said, I'm visiting my sister," Marcus repeated patiently. "Her name is Elena Harris. She lives on Oak Street." The mention of a local street and a familiar name seemed to give Hale a moment's pause. Everyone in Mill Creek knew the Harris family, but Caldwell was too far down his chosen path to turn back. He saw the wallet contained a few credit cards and a small amount of cash. Nothing to satisfy his pre-written narrative of a criminal. Frustration radiated from him in palpable waves. He tossed the wallet onto the trunk. "You a vet?" he asked, his eyes narrowing as he took in Marcus's posture, the ramrod straightness of his back that even the demeaning position could not erase. "I am," Marcus confirmed. "Oh, yeah." Caldwell sneered, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "What are you, a cook? A supply clerk? Bet you spent your whole career peeling potatoes at some base." He was baiting him, trying to get a reaction, a flash of anger that would justify his actions. Marcus remained silent. He had commanded armies. He had advised presidents. He had faced down warlords and terrorists. The taunts of a bitter small-town cop were like gnats buzzing around a lion. He refused to give him the satisfaction. His silence was the worst possible response. To Caldwell, it was not discipline. It was insolence. It was the calm of a man who thought he was better than him. And Vance Caldwell could not stand that. "You think you're something special, don't you?" Caldwell's voice dropped, becoming more menacing. He leaned in close, his face just inches from the back of Marcus's head. "Well, you ain't special here. Here, you're just another punk who needs to be taught a lesson in respect." He shoved Marcus hard, forcing his chest and face against the cold, wet trunk of the car. The impact sent a dull thud echoing into the night. "Vance!" Hale's voice was sharp with alarm. "What are you doing?" "I'm teaching him some respect for the law," Caldwell yelled back, his control completely gone. He grabbed Marcus's arm and twisted it violently behind his back, searching for the pressure point that would cause the most pain. But Marcus was not a civilian. His body was a finely tuned instrument of discipline and strength. He did not fight back, but he did not yield either. his muscles tensed, absorbing the torque, his feet remaining planted. He was not resisting arrest. He was simply refusing to be broken. This infuriated Caldwell beyond reason. This man should be pleading, crying out, or fighting back. This quiet, immovable strength was an indictment of his own authority. "You want to play tough?" Caldwell grunted, sweat and rain mixing on his brow. He put his full weight into it, wrenching Marcus's arm higher. "Let's see how tough you are." With a final desperate heave, he pulled Marcus away from the car, spun him around, and slammed him against the side of the vehicle with a sickening crunch of metal. Marcus's head hit the passenger side window frame. For a split second, the world went white with a flash of pain. The carefully maintained wall of his composure finally cracked, not with a roar, but with a quiet, dangerous intake of breath. The game had changed. This was no longer a traffic stop. It was an assault. The impact against the car sent a starburst of pain through Marcus's temple. The cold glass of the window pressed against his cheek, and he could smell the ozone in the air, the damp earth, and the cheap, sour scent of Officer Caldwell's rage. In that instant, a lifetime of discipline warred with a primal instinct to survive, to neutralize the threat. Images flashed through his mind. Dusty streets in combat zones, tense standoffs in distant lands, the faces of young soldiers who had looked to him for guidance under fire. He had always been the calm eye of the storm. He had to be that now. "That's enough, Caldwell," Hale shouted, finally moving forward. "We're on camera. This is going too far." Caldwell ignored him. He was lost in his own red mist of fury. "You see?" he panted, his face contorted as he pressed Marcus harder against the car. "Not so tough now, are you?" He yanked Marcus's arms behind his back with practiced, brutal efficiency, preparing to cuff him. Marcus's leather jacket bunched up around his shoulders, pulling his sweater taut against his chest. It was then that Caldwell decided to add one more act of humiliation. "Let's see what you're hiding under this tough guy jacket," he sneered, grabbing the lapels of the jacket with both hands. With a powerful rip, he tore the jacket open. The buttons on Marcus's sweater beneath it strained, and one popped off, clattering unheard onto the wet asphalt. The fabric parted, revealing the crisp, dark blue material of the United States Army dress uniform shirt he wore underneath. He had kept it on from a formal event earlier that day, simply throwing the sweater and jacket on over it for the anonymous drive. For a moment, neither officer registered what they were seeing. To them, it was just a dark shirt. But the movement had dislodged something from Marcus's inner jacket pocket. A small leather-bound case fell to the ground, landing with a soft splash in a puddle by Hale's feet. "What's that?" Caldwell demanded, distracted. Hale bent down, his movements hesitant, and picked up the case. It was heavy, solid. He wiped the rainwater from it with his sleeve and fumbled it open. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, was a military identification card, but it was not the standard card of an enlisted man or a junior officer. This one was heavy grade with holographic seals and a formidable-looking photo of Marcus Kane, his expression stern and powerful, a stark contrast to the calm man currently pressed against the car. Hale's flashlight beam trembled as it fell upon the card. His eyes widened. He read the name first. Kane, Marcus T. Then the rank. He read it once, then again, his lips moving silently, as if the words were in a foreign language his brain refused to process. "General," he whispered, the word barely audible over the rain. Caldwell, still struggling with Marcus's uncooperative arms, scoffed. "General what?" "General Kane," Hale said, his voice shaking. He took a staggering step back, his face pale as a ghost in the flashing lights. He held the ID out as if it were a venomous snake. "General," as in 4-star general. The words hung in the air, seeming to bend the very fabric of the night. The rain, the flashing lights, the tension, it all seemed to freeze. Caldwell let go of Marcus's arm as if it had suddenly become white hot. He snatched the ID from his partner's trembling hand. His own eyes, full of blustering confidence just seconds before, now darted across the card in disbelief. He saw the title, Commander, United States Strategic Command. He saw the 4 silver stars gleaming under the beam of his flashlight like tiny accusatory eyes. His mind reeled, trying to connect the man in the sneering caricature he had created. The punk, the cook, the clunker driver, with the information on the card in his hand. It was impossible. 4-star generals did not drive rented sedans through Mill Creek in the pouring rain. They traveled in motorcades, flanked by security on their way to meet with world leaders. They did not get pulled over for a phantom broken taillight. He looked from the powerful, decorated man on the ID to the man standing before him. Marcus had straightened up the moment Caldwell had released him. He had not said a word. He was simply watching them, his expression unreadable, his eyes holding a weight that Caldwell was only now beginning to comprehend. The rain slicked back Marcus's hair, dripped from his chin. His sweater was askew, his jacket torn open, and on the collar points of his exposed uniform shirt, now visible in the harsh light, were the embroidered insignia of his rank. 4 gleaming silver star. The swagger drained out of Vance Caldwell like air from a punctured tire. His face, flushed with rage a moment ago, was now a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. The world had just tilted on its axis, and he was in a free fall. He had not just assaulted a citizen. He had not just falsely arrested a veteran. He had physically assaulted one of the highest-ranking, most powerful military officers in the entire United States Armed Forces. The silence that followed the revelation was more profound than any sound. It was a vacuum sucking the air from Officer Caldwell's lungs. The rain and the crackle of the police radio were distant, irrelevant noises from another universe. The only thing that was real was the man standing before him, and the 4 stars that now seemed to burn with an impossibly bright, cold fire. General Marcus Kane calmly adjusted his shirt, his movements deliberate and precise. He looked at Caldwell, then at Hale, and for the first time since the stop began, his eyes held something other than calm observation. It was not anger. It was something far more terrifying. Disappointment. The kind of disappointment a commander shows a subordinate who has failed a critical mission and cost lives. "Officer Hale," the general said, his voice devoid of heat, but carrying an authority that resonated in their bones. It was a voice that had commanded divisions, a voice that had spoken in the White House Situation Room. "Pick up my wallet." Hale, jolted from his stupor, scrambled to obey. He snatched the wallet from the wet trunk and held it out with a shaking hand. "Officer Caldwell," the general continued, his gaze now locking onto the senior officer, "you have my identification." Caldwell's hand was trembling so violently he could barely hold the ID case. He looked down at it as if it were a live grenade, the pin pulled. He tried to speak, to form an apology, but his mouth was dry, his tongue a useless piece of leather. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding, officer," General Kane stated, his tone cutting through the pathetic excuse. "You saw a black man driving a modest car in your town at night, and you made a series of assumptions. You fabricated a reason for the stop. You attempted to intimidate and provoke me, and when your expectations were not met, you escalated to physical assault." He recited the facts with the dispassionate clarity of an after-action report. Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Caldwell's career. That's not," Caldwell stammered, looking desperately at his partner for support. But Hale was staring at the ground, his face a mask of shame and fear. General Kane took a step forward. Caldwell flinched and took an involuntary step back, a move of pure instinct. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. "You asked me what I was," the general said, his voice dropping to a low, intense level. "A cook, a supply clerk. I am the commander of Strategic Command. My duties involve the oversight of the nation's entire nuclear arsenal. The bombers, the missiles, the submarines, everything. I spend my days in deliberation over matters of global security, making decisions that have consequences you cannot possibly fathom." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And tonight I was dragged out of my car and slammed against my window because you, Officer Caldwell, had a bad night and a worse attitude." He turned his attention to Hale. "And you, Officer Hale? You stood by. You watched it happen. You knew it was wrong. Your silence makes you complicit." Hale looked up, his eyes glistening with tears of panic. "Sir, I'm sorry. He's my training officer. I didn't know what to do." "You do your duty, officer," the general replied instantly, the words like chips of ice. "You uphold the law regardless of who is breaking it, even if it's the man sitting next to you." The radio in Caldwell's cruiser crackled to life. "Unit 3, what's your status? You've been on this traffic stop for some time." The voice of the dispatcher was a lifeline from a world Caldwell no longer belonged to. He reached for the radio on his shoulder, his hand fumbling. "Dispatch, everything is 10-4. "No," General Kane said firmly. "Everything is not 10-4. He held out his hand. "Give me your radio." It was not a request. Caldwell, completely broken, unclipped the radio and handed it over. General Kane keyed the microphone. His voice was once again the calm, commanding presence that had defined him for decades. "Dispatch, this is General Marcus Kane of the United States Army. I am at the location of this traffic stop on Route 7. I have been unlawfully detained and assaulted by 2 of your officers, badge numbers 218 and 305. I require your chief of police to meet me at this location immediately. I also want you to contact the state police barracks and inform them that I will be requesting a full and independent investigation by their Internal Affairs Division. Acknowledge." There was a stunned silence from the other end. The dispatcher, a woman who had been handling calls in Mill Creek for years, had heard it all. Drunks, domestic disputes, teenagers racing on the highway. She had never in all her life heard a call like this. "Sir, can you repeat that?" she asked, her voice trembling. General Kane repeated the entire transmission, word for word, without a single inflection of emotion. He then added, "You have minutes to confirm that Chief Brody is en route. If I do not receive that confirmation, my next call will be to the governor's office and the Department of Justice." Kane, out. He unkeyed the mic and handed the radio back to a stone-faced Caldwell. The two officers looked at each other, the full catastrophic scale of their actions finally crashing down upon them. They had not just angered a powerful man. They had triggered a protocol, a chain of command that was now moving inexorably against them. With the unstoppable force of an armored division, their small, insulated world had just been invaded by a superpower. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. The rain seemed to fall harder, the flashing lights more frantic, as if reflecting the internal panic of the two officers. Caldwell had retreated to the side of his cruiser, leaning against it heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. He stared out into the dark woods, seeing not trees, but the wreckage of his life, his long career, his pension, his reputation in the small town where he was once a figure of authority. All of it was vaporizing before his eyes. Hale stood frozen in the middle of the road, rainwater plastering his hair to his forehead. He kept replaying the events in his head, every moment of his own cowardice, every instance where he could have spoken up but did not. He had followed his senior officer's lead just as he had been trained. But the academy never taught you what to do when your leader was marching you off a cliff. General Marcus Kane, in stark contrast, appeared completely at ease. He had retrieved his jacket and, despite the tear, put it back on. He leaned against the trunk of his rental car, the same spot where he had been slammed moments before, with his arms crossed over his chest. He was patient, observant, a commander waiting for the chaos to resolve. Exactly as promised, a set of headlights appeared, coming down the road far too fast for the wet conditions. A second police SUV, this one with the official markings of the Mill Creek police chief, fishtailed slightly as it skidded to a stop behind Caldwell's cruiser. A portly man in his late 50s, Chief Leland Brody, burst out of the driver's side. He was not even wearing a proper coat, just his uniform shirt with the sleeves hastily rolled down. His face, normally ruddy, was ashen. He took in the scene, his two officers looking like condemned men, and the tall, imposing black man standing calmly by the civilian vehicle. "What in God's name is going on here?" Brody boomed, trying to project an authority he clearly did not feel. His eyes darted to Caldwell. "Vance, report." Caldwell could not speak. He just gestured weakly toward the general. Brody's eyes fell on the uniform shirt visible beneath the open leather jacket, and the 4 stars on the collar seemed to physically push him back a step. He was a small-town chief. The highest-ranking person he usually dealt with was the mayor or, on a bad day, a county judge. A 4-star general was as foreign to his world as an alien landing. You're General Kane," Brody stammered, approaching cautiously. "I am, Chief," the general said, his voice level. "And you are Leland Brody. We met once years ago at a town fundraiser for the fire department. My sister, Elena Harris, introduced us." The mention of Elena's name seemed to punch all the air out of Brody's chest. He remembered Elena. He remembered she had a brother in the army, a real high flyer, she had said, with pride. He never imagined this. Elena's boy, Brody whispered, the color draining completely from his face. My God, what did they do? Your officers, General Kane corrected him, his tone hardening, conducted an unlawful traffic stop without probable cause. They forcibly removed me from my vehicle, and Officer Caldwell specifically assaulted me. Brody stared in horror at Caldwell, who refused to meet his gaze. Vance, is this true? Chief, he was acting suspicious, Caldwell began, his voice a pathetic whine. He is the brother of a woman you've known for years, Vance, Brody roared, his own fear now transmuting into rage at his subordinate. He was driving to his sister's house. What part of that is suspicious to you? Brody turned back to the general, his expression pleading. General, sir, on behalf of the Mill Creek Police Department, I am profoundly sorry. This is a terrible mistake, a misunderstanding. It stopped being a misunderstanding when your officer put his hands on me, Chief, the general replied coolly. This is now a matter for the state police and potentially federal investigators. Your department's chance to handle this internally ended when Officer Caldwell decided to use his authority as a weapon. As if on cue, another set of headlights appeared in the distance, followed by another. The state police had arrived, and they were not coming alone. Within minutes, the quiet, dark stretch of road was transformed into a major crime scene. 2 state police cruisers and an unmarked supervisor's car blocked the road. A tall, severe-looking state police captain named Sofia Ramirez emerged, her expression all business. She walked directly to General Kane, ignoring the local cops completely. General Kane, I'm Captain Ramirez, State Police. We were informed you required assistance. Captain, the general nodded. I do. I wish to file a formal complaint and press charges for assault and civil rights violations against Officer Vance Caldwell and Officer Travis Hale of the Mill Creek Police Department. Captain Ramirez's gaze swept over the 2 local cops, her eyes lingering on Caldwell with undisguised contempt. Understood, sir. We will take their weapons, their vehicles, and their statements. They are officially off this scene. My troopers will escort you wherever you need to go. Caldwell and Hale stood in stunned silence as 2 state troopers approached them, their movements crisp and professional. Officers, let's have your sidearms. You're to come with us. Chief Brody could only watch, impotent, as his authority was stripped away on the side of a dark, rain-slicked road. The storm had made landfall, and his small provincial department was ground zero. He had not just lost control of a traffic stop, he had lost control of his entire world. The following morning, the sun rose over Mill Creek on a town that was fundamentally changed. The story had ripped through the community like a wildfire, fueled by whispers from the night shift dispatcher, the sight of state police cars at the station, and the inevitable gossip that thrives in close-knit places. The Mill Creek Police Department, once a source of mundane local authority, was now the subject of a scandal that had reached the governor's office by breakfast. For General Marcus Kane, the night had been long. After being escorted from the scene by the state police, he had given a calm, detailed, and damning statement at the state barracks. He omitted no detail. The fabricated cause for the stop, Caldwell's taunts, the unnecessary escalation, Hale's complicity, and the final assault. He spoke not with anger, but with the chilling precision of a commander. detailing a catastrophic failure in the chain of command. He refused medical attention for the bruise forming on his temple, stating only that the real injuries were not to his person, but to the principles of justice and trust. He finally arrived at his sister's small house on Oak Street just before dawn. Elena was awake, sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, a blanket over her frail legs. She knew something was wrong. She had been calling him all night. "Marcus," she breathed, her voice filled with relief and worry. "I was so scared." He knelt by her chair, taking her thin, cool hand in his. He told her everything, his voice softening as he spoke to her. She listened, her eyes flashing with the fire he remembered from their childhood. "That man," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Vance Caldwell. He was a bully even in high school, always picking on people he thought were weaker than him. It seems he never grew out of it." "He picked the wrong one this time, Elena," Marcus said quietly. Meanwhile, the lives of Vance Caldwell and Travis Hale were imploding. They had been placed on administrative leave, stripped of their badges and guns, and ordered not to speak to anyone about the case. Caldwell spent the morning pacing his small living room, his mind a maelstrom of denial and rage. "It was a misunderstanding," he yelled at his wife, who looked at him with frightened eyes. "The guy was acting shady. I did my job. It's not my fault he turned out to be some big shot." He was already building his defense, a fortress of self-pity and blame-shifting. He saw himself as the victim, a hard-working cop taken down by a powerful man with a grudge. Hale's experience was vastly different. He sat at his kitchen table staring at a cold cup of coffee, the events of the night playing on a loop in his head. He felt a profound, gut-wrenching shame. He had sworn an oath to uphold the law, and he had stood by and watched it be desecrated. His wife had tried to talk to him, but he could not form the words. He saw the general's disappointed eyes, heard his words. "Your silence makes you complicit." He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the general was right. By midday, the official investigation was in full swing. Captain Ramirez was as good as her word. She had assigned her best detectives, and they were methodical. They pulled the dash cam footage from Caldwell's cruiser, which corroborated every word of the general's statement. The audio was even more damning, capturing Caldwell's taunts and escalating aggression perfectly. Then they started digging into Officer Vance Caldwell's personnel file. It was a revelation. Over his long career, Caldwell had accumulated multiple civilian complaints, nearly all for excessive force and verbal abuse. Most of the complainants were minorities. In every single case, Chief Brody had conducted a cursory internal review and exonerated his officer, usually citing a lack of evidence or chalking it up to a misunderstanding. It was a clear, undeniable pattern of behavior, enabled and protected by his superior. The investigators also brought in Chief Brody. In the sterile environment of the state barracks interview room, under the glare of fluorescent lights, his blustering small-town authority meant nothing. They laid out the evidence before him. The dash cam video, Caldwell's complaint history, his own signature on the dismissal forms for each of those complaints. "Chief," a detective from the Department of Justice, a woman named Avery, said calmly, "this isn't about one bad traffic stop anymore. This is about a pattern of abuse and a departmental cover-up. You're exposed here, Frank." Severely, Brody began to sweat. This was no longer about saving Caldwell. This was about saving himself. Late that afternoon, Travis Hale received a phone call from his lawyer, a public defender assigned to him. "Travis," the lawyer said, "I've spoken with the state prosecutor. They know you're the junior officer here. They have you on camera, and they know you didn't throw any punches. They are willing to offer you a deal if you provide a full and truthful testimony against Officer Caldwell and Chief Brody, detailing not just that night but any other incidents you're aware of. They will recommend leniency. It's your only way out of this." Hale looked at his reflection in the dark screen of his phone. He saw a scared young man in a police uniform he no longer felt he deserved to wear. He thought of his oath. He thought of his complicity. And he made a decision. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm for the first time in hours. "I'll tell them everything." The first gear in the great machine of justice had turned. The weeks that followed moved with a speed and force that left Mill Creek reeling. The case of the state versus Vance Caldwell became a media sensation, a textbook example of systemic rot brought to light by an extraordinary circumstance. It was no longer a local story. It was a national headline. The Department of Justice formally announced a federal civil rights investigation into the Mill Creek Police Department, signaling that the rot was deeper than just one officer. Vance Caldwell, defiant to the end, pleaded not guilty. He hired a local lawyer who tried to paint General Kane as an arrogant, out-of-touch elitist who had overreacted to a standard police procedure. It was a disastrous strategy. On the witness stand, General Marcus Kane was the personification of credibility. In his immaculate Class A uniform, his chest adorned with ribbons, representing a lifetime of service and valor, he recounted the events of that rainy night. He was not emotional or vindictive. He simply stated the facts, his powerful voice filling the courtroom. He laid out the timeline, quoted Caldwell's words, and described the physical assault with military precision. When Caldwell's lawyer tried to question his motives, the general simply looked at the jury and said, "I have served this country for decades. I have defended the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I did not do so only to have my own rights violated on a dark road in my home state by a man who shares the same oath to protect and serve." The prosecution's star witness, however, was former Officer Travis Hale. Having resigned from the force as part of his plea deal, he took the stand in a civilian suit that hung loosely on his frame. He looked exhausted but resolute. He corroborated every detail of the general's testimony. Then the prosecutor asked him about the departmental culture under Chief Brody. Hale's testimony was devastating. He described a good old boy network where Caldwell was the enforcer and Brody was the protector. He recounted other incidents he had witnessed, where Caldwell had used excessive force during arrests of minority individuals, both of which were later dismissed by Brody. After the victims were intimidated into silence, he explained that complaining about Caldwell was career suicide. "You either went along," Hale said, his voice cracking, "or you were gone." Chief Brody was forced to resign in disgrace before he could be formally indicted for obstruction of justice and enabling a pattern of civil rights abuses. His departure marked the end of an era of unaccountability. The verdict for Vance Caldwell was swift and unanimous. The jury found him guilty on all counts: assault, unlawful detainment, and, most seriously, felony violation of civil rights under color of authority. At the sentencing, the judge looked down at the disgraced former officer. "Mr. Caldwell, you were given a badge and a gun and entrusted with the power of the state. You turned that power into a weapon of your own prejudice and insecurity. You did not see a citizen. You saw a target. You did not see a patriot. You saw a problem. The man you assaulted has dedicated his life to protecting the very freedoms you sought to strip from him. Your actions were a stain on your badge and on this community." Vance Caldwell was sentenced to years in federal prison, a stunning and unprecedented penalty for a police officer in that region. His life was shattered. He lost his job, his pension, his freedom, and the respect of the community he had once patrolled with arrogant impunity. The karma was not just a slap on the wrist, it was a total and complete demolition of the life he had built on a foundation of abuse. Travis Hale received probation and community service. He would never work in law enforcement again, a consequence he accepted as just. He left Mill Creek, hoping to start over somewhere new, forever carrying the lesson of what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. The Mill Creek Police Department was placed under a federal consent decree, effectively taking its management out of local hands and subjecting it to years of rigorous oversight and retraining. The mechanism of justice, once it started turning, had ground all the way down. Months later, a crisp autumn sun cast long shadows across the quiet lawns of Oak Street. The fiery spectacle of the leaves, crimson, gold, and burnt orange, seemed to offer a gentle closure to the turbulence of the preceding period. Inside Elena's warm, sunlit house, the scent of cinnamon and fresh brewed coffee filled the air, a comforting aroma of normalcy. The media circus had packed up and moved on to the next headline, leaving Mill Creek to quietly reckon with its exposed wounds. General Marcus Kane sat at his sister's familiar kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a heavy ceramic mug. He was in a simple gray sweatshirt and jeans, the unassuming attire he preferred when he was simply Marcus. Across from him, Elena looked more vibrant than she had in years. The long legal battle, the stress, and the public scrutiny had been a trial for her as well, but seeing justice served had been a powerful medicine. The fire in her eyes, which had dimmed with her illness, now burned with a steady, determined light. "You know," she said, her voice clear and strong, "the strangest thing has been happening. People in town, people I've known my whole life, who used to just give a polite nod, they stop me in the grocery store now. They want to talk about it. Some apologize as if the town itself needs to atone. Chief Brody's wife even sent over a casserole." She shook her head, a wry smile on her lips. "A sorry my husband enabled a racist thug casserole." Marcus chuckled, a deep, warm sound. "And how does that feel?" "It feels complicated," Elena admitted. "It feels like they finally see something they refused to look at for years. Your 4 stars were like a floodlight, Marcus. You forced them to see the rot that's been in the floorboards all along." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Dad would have been so proud of you, not just for the rank or for winning in court. He would have been proud of how you fought. You never raised your voice, never lost your dignity. You used their own system to dismantle them with cold, hard facts. You showed them what true strength looks like. Marcus looked out the window, watching a golden leaf drift slowly to the ground. I've spent my life fighting on one kind of battlefield, Kandahar and Afghanistan. The enemy, for the most part, is clear. The objectives are defined by maps and intelligence reports. You fight, you strategize, you protect your soldiers, and you try to come home. But there's another battlefield right here at home. It's fought on dark highways, in quiet neighborhoods, in biased courtrooms, and in the hearts and minds of people. There are no clear lines. The enemy is an idea, a prejudice as pervasive and invisible as the air itself. In many ways, that's the harder fight. He thought of the thousands of young men and women under his command. He had trained them to face down enemy combatants, to survive ambushes, to be warriors. But he had not prepared them for the fight they might face after taking off their uniform, the battle against a suspicion that clings to the color of their skin more stubbornly than any desert dust. Since the story broke, he continued, his voice quiet, my office has been flooded with letters and emails, hundreds of them. Most are from service members. A black master sergeant pulled over multiple times in a month in his own neighborhood. A Latina captain denied a home loan for reasons that evaporated when her white husband applied. A young private just back from his first tour roughed up outside a bar because he didn't look like he belonged there. They were all fighting the same war, just on different fronts, with no one to call for air support. The anger he had suppressed for so long was still there, but it had been forged into something else, something cold, sharp, and useful. It was the same process by which he turned raw intelligence into a battlefield strategy. He saw the problem, analyzed the enemy's tactics, and formulated a plan of attack. I'm setting up a foundation, he told his sister, his eyes meeting hers. I'm calling it the Honor Guard Initiative. Its mission will be to provide top-tier legal defense and advocacy for veterans, especially those from minority backgrounds who face discrimination or injustice here at home. The men and women who write a blank check to this country, payable with their lives, deserve to have that check cashed. They deserve to have this country fight for them when they return. Elena's eyes welled with tears, but they were tears of fierce pride. That's my little brother, she whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Always a general, always planning, always protecting your soldiers. Later that afternoon, before his flight back to Virginia, Marcus found himself driving down the same stretch of Route 7. The sun was warm on the asphalt, the woods on either side a blaze of autumn color. It looked so peaceful, so utterly ordinary. There was no plaque, no monument to mark the spot where a battle for the soul of a community had been fought. He pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, the crunch of the tires, the only sound. He got out of the car and walked to the spot where he had been slammed against his rental. He ran his hand over the smooth, cool metal of his new car's fender. He felt no triumph, no lingering desire for revenge against the broken men who had assaulted him. Vance Caldwell was in federal prison, a small man undone by his own hate. Travis Hale was somewhere trying to rebuild a life forever haunted by his own cowardice. They were casualties of a war they did not even understand they were fighting. Marcus felt only a profound, clarifying sense of purpose. His battle that night had not truly been against them. It had been against the insidious idea that a person's worth could be judged by the color of their skin or the perceived modesty of their possessions. He had won not by throwing a punch, but by wielding the immense weight of his character and the unshakable strength of his discipline. The 4 stars on his uniform had been the key, the unexpected variable that unlocked the door to justice. They had forced the world to see the man, not the stereotype. Now he would use that key to open doors for others. He got back in his car, the engine humming to life. He was leaving the ghosts of that night behind. But he was not retreating. He was advancing, his eyes fixed on the new battlefield that lay ahead, ready to command a different kind of army in a war that was just as critical to the future of his nation. The story of General Marcus Kane is a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person is not the uniform they wear or the title they hold, but the content of their character. An act of prejudice on a dark road set in motion a chain of events that exposed a deep injustice, but it also revealed an unshakable strength. The officers saw a target, but they found a titan of integrity. This was not just a story of karma. It was a story about accountability. It shows that when one person has the courage to stand firm in the face of abuse, they can bring an entire corrupt system to its knees. What do you think would have happened if he had not been a general? That is the question we should all be asking. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will not miss our next story of justice and unexpected twists. Let us know in the comments what part of this story stood out to you the most. We appreciate your support.